So hi, I see some familiar faces. For those people who don't know me, my name is Roberta Buiani, and I'm the artistic director of the Art Science Salon, and Stephen, who is there, is the scientific director. The Art Science Salon is collective and a group of scientists and artists who are whose scope is to have conversations and with the goal of collaborating between art and science. And we conceive of collaboration as a mutual exchange that is not the science being predominant, but not the art as being just an embellishment. So, and because we think that even collaboration can actually benefit both research. Said that, today is the second day of Emergent Forum, which is a special program, an outreach program promoted by the Fields Institute for Research in Mathematical Science, which is our main host. This event was possible thanks to Fields and thanks to the Italian Embassy, who was very generous to help us bring the artists that you'll see, that you saw yesterday, and that you'll see today and tomorrow. We also thank the Italian Institute for the Italian Cultural Institute. They will throw us a party tomorrow, and we also thank a bunch of other entities such as the drama department here at U of T and the digital dramaturgy lab. They were very generous, and they've gone all the way to create the right environment for the performance tomorrow. So without any further ado, I would like to acknowledge this land. As you know, this land has been populated for over 15,000 years by indigenous populations. The most recent, the Mississauga, the Credit River, and I'm really grateful that we are able to do this here in this sacred land. And it's something that, even though this is a somehow scientific event, it's worth remembering. Today I am very excited to host Margherita Pevere, who is a scholar and bioartist and a performing artist. She is currently based in Helsinki, where she is doing her PhD. And she will entertain you and inspire you with a lecture. The lecture will be around like half an hour, but she will explain what's going to happen, and then we'll have a short break, and then we will move outside. So, thanks. I welcome Margherita here.
I guess I can use this one.
Okay, so I'm going to turn this on.
Just 1 second. Then you see the right. Yeah, it's right. It's try it a little bit so that people. Okay, so it seems. It's not what. You want to sleep? Yeah, because we need to change the power plant. Power plant is not functioning properly, and since we are the magic of the technology, if something doesn't work, it looks like a failure. But
So it's a honor and a pleasure to be here tonight, and I'm really thankful to all staff of Outside Salon for inviting me to the Italian Embassy, Fields Institute and Italian Cultural Institute for allowing me to be here tonight. And I must confess that the feeling I have is a bit like when dreams come true, because when I was a teenager, trying to figure out what was the best way to discover the world, and I was exploring my talents, and I realized that maths was not my talent. And for this reason, I always admired the Fields Medal, and I deeply admired those, for me, inexplicable minds that could access such mysteries. And I always saw that as something that maybe would stay there on the Mount Olympus. But so I've realized that I've been privileged enough to be here with my art. So thank you for that, really. Just let me see if now it works. Yes, it does. So tonight I will present you a lecture which will then later evolve. It's called Anatomy of an Interconnected System. And what I would like to do with you is to analyze, discuss, explore a selection of pictures from a specific time frame and from a specific cultural background, cultural tradition. And the time frame is between Middle Ages and contemporary times. And the culture I refer to is European and Western culture. I say that because I am aware and happy that there might be people with different cultural backgrounds in this room, and I'm really looking forward to their feedbacks of what I'm saying. The specific time frame I will be focusing on is referring to the establishment of anthropocentrism. Anthropocentrism, which is the understanding of humans as the divinely sanctioned species to rule upon Earth and to rule upon creatures. And it's rooted, it started developing in the Greek time, Greek philosophy, and then developed and found its most clear expression in Judaic-Christian tradition. So in the book of Genesis, you will see that at a certain point, God creates the world and then creates the animals and living beings, and on the last day he creates humans, first the male, then the woman, and they will then populate the world. And further on in the Bible, there are some passages saying you will teach the word of God to the whole world. And how does it affect the way we understand the ecosystem? How does it affect the way we understand nature? Well, we might discover it later on. Since we are in an art and science context, I would like to start with this picture, which is a tree of life depicted by Ernst Haeckel. Ernst Haeckel was a biologist and illustrator. Now we would call him illustrator. At the time, back when he lived, probably the word we would use was different. However, he made wonderful depictions of microorganisms and of marine, of sea fauna. And amongst his most well-known pictures, we have this tree of life that actually, let me see if now I get it. I don't know if it's big enough, but here at the top you see the word Menschen, which means humans in German. And it's still discussed, it's still debated whether he drew back from humans back to what would be the organism from which humans evolved, or whether it was his intention to put humans at the top of the evolution. This tree was drawn a few years after the Origin of Species was published. So it's really clear the influence of Darwin's theories behind this picture. But so I can't state that he put humans at the top of this tree because he believed that humans are the top of evolution. However, these kind of images have affected the way we understand evolution a lot, and also how we understand the positions of human in the biosphere and in the ecosystem. But if we go from this picture that is, it's built on a vertical dynamics, so there is an origin which is here at the bottom and then goes up, take branches over time, and then we go to the top. And we compare it with this picture, not this one, but this one, we see another kind of verticality, of vertical distribution in space. Is any of you familiar with this picture? Or does it remind you of anything? It's the Chartres Cathedral. It's one of the masterpieces of French Gothic architecture. I've never been there yet. I hope I will soon. But as we can see, everything in the space is distributed along lines that go towards the sky. Of course, in the sky there is God. And this extreme tension in space leading towards where God is placed and where God's reigns over the world create a very strong contrast. Okay, let me see. If I go this way, and if I go this way, here we are. This is the floor of the Chartres Cathedral, and what we see is a labyrinth. Well, labyrinth is an ancient symbol. It's the first labyrinth dates back to prehistorical times. Then the symbol developed, was adopted also in Greek culture. Maybe we know the Minotaur myth. And then evolved. There are several kinds of labyrinths. Some of them have an entrance and an exit. Some of them have an entrance and it's the same exit. Then it further evolved over time. We have mazes, which are the ones where you enter and then get lost because paths continue branching over and over and over again. But however, and then it eventually became a sort of game. In the Baroque times, it became a sort of game, and we have these on the next to the newspaper news, just like Sudoku. But originally, it's a symbol of a space where you get lost, and it's not surprising that in the same building we have this extreme vertical structure leading to God, and where are humans placed? They are placed on earth, lost in a maze of sins and without any chance of getting saved. So in order to get out of the labyrinth, they could trust God, have faith, and maybe find a way out. And these kind of pictures represent fairly well how the understanding of the cosmos was in medieval times. Of course, it's always hard to generalize, but since I'm spanning over a very, very long time of 11 centuries, we need to just set some key points and compare them. why I say that this is representative of medieval times understanding of the relationship with nature and gods and the cosmos, where actually we see humans are lost somewhere on Earth, and we also have to understand, and we can remember that nature was still a bit of a mystery. There was not extensive knowledge about natural phenomenon. So the understanding of the nature was intertwined with magic, exoterism, and something they could not understood. And to go out of this confusing, mysterious environment, the way out was through religion, through spirituality. And this is what we see in this picture. It's a beautiful Madonna by Giuseppe Salvi di Speme from the 13th century in Siena in Italy. And what we see here is a Madonna holding the baby Jesus. And the kind of depiction of this woman, of this saint, well, it's not saint, but of this goddess, is without any trace of corporeality. She doesn't have a body. The background is completely flat, and there is no trace of flesh. Her face is completely soft. There is no weight in her body. And we will see how through tiny changes in the pictorial style, things will evolve. This is a painting from two centuries later, Gentile da Fabriano. And what we see here is the first attempts of perspective. It's really hard to understand, but there is, through these lines, we see that the painter was aware of perspective. Anyhow, we see that the main picture in the painting is Madonna holding the child. Next to her, we have two people. Next to her, we have two more people. One is Saint Nicolaus. The woman is Saint Catherine, and the guy kneeling down is probably the commissioner. Again, here we have another example of a huge, beautiful Madonna protecting humanity under her court, and around her we have the saints, we have angels. Here in this area we have the saints, people from church, and humanity is down there looking for her protection. But what happens next? I really like this picture. It's by San Francesco d'Assisi. It's in the chapel of not the chapel. It's in the church in Assisi. He painted the whole church, the whole basilica there. And we see here a different perception of tridimensionality. So we see that the background is more realistic than in the previous picture. Let me see if I go this way. Yeah, we see a little bit of landscape down here, whereas here the landscape is fairly proportioned. And we see the saint of the same size of the other character in the scene and of the donkey, of the animal. The scene refers to the story where San Francesco meets person without the coat, and he shares his coat to show his generosity. and denial of earthly goods. But what is more striking is to be found in pictures like this. This is the Dormitio Virginis, which is the scene of the death of Madonna. And it's a fairly revolutionary way of depicting the scene, because we see that Madonna, she's in the center, Jesus is also in the center, so they have the most important part of the scene. Jesus is holding the soul of Madonna ready to go up to the sky. But we see also a series of other characters that we can recognize they are saints through the radiating, glowing circle around the head. But there are also other people, like this woman, and they are all the same size. And not only they are the same size, they also have a tridimensional shape, which is obtained too, for example, using the chiaroscuro, which is the distribution of space on the surface. Sorry. So if we go back to this picture, from this scene, or this scene, to that one, we see how over time, with tiny changes, tiny step, but humans obtain a more central part of the scene. They are not only lost on earth, looking for God to come save them, but they slowly obtain the dignity to be part of the scene and to be characters in the world, to be active characters in the world. And this evolves further in the work of artists like Albrecht Dürer or Leonardo da Vinci, which somebody mentioned here in this very room yesterday evening. So Leonardo da Vinci was Italian. Albrecht Dürer is a very similar figure from Germany. And Albrecht Dürer was also very successful in life. But despite his success, he never stopped learning. He never stopped trying to understand new techniques and to learn new ways of developing his own art. So he could be another good example, not only because he tried to develop his artistry further, but also because he tried to develop the technical understanding behind the matter he was dealing with. So he's a good example of a person investigating both realms, which also resonates with the program of Art Size Salon and with the things we are discussing in this room. And what we see here, it's a proportion study, which is a way of understanding the structure of the body through a rational mathematical proportion, through a mathematical rule. And I like this picture very much because it resonates with another one that is more popular by Leonardo da Vinci. This is a little bit more German. We can discuss about the differences between the two cultures. Sorry, and she's a woman. And she's a woman. But so we see that there is the attempt and the intention to understand nature through rational thinking. So it's not only about faith in a God that will come and save you. It's about rational thinking, which allows access the truth of life. And how does it evolve? Like this. This is an extremely advanced picture from a technological point of view, and I will show you why. What we see is a landscape, it's an urban landscape. It's a place in Italy. We also see from the use of color and the use of land that we are in Tuscany. But there is a sequence of plains. We have first this, which is a sort of muretto.
Like a fence that is...
Yeah, it's sort of... Yeah, it creates a wall. It creates a wall, but thanks to these columns, we see the place behind it, and the place is paved with geometrical, with square tiles. The buildings behind it are, of course, at the time, they were wonderful example of modern architectures at the time, and it goes back to see it goes everything into a center, and we see here another kind of perspective which is called aerial perspective. It's something that Italians got from Flemish painters, which uses the haze in air to create a sense of depth. So what is the background will be slightly foggy, slightly bluish, and this recreates the feeling you have, the feeling and also the optical phenomena you have watching very deep landscape. So we have the combination of two perspective types, and everything is encased in a rock-solid mathematical grid. All lines are either parallel, vertical lines, and the horizontal lines all converge into the same point. And we might discuss it. We also might discuss that maybe reality doesn't always fit into a mathematical grid. But however, what this picture shows us is that there is the intention to understand the world through rational thinking, and it's also feasible because this picture looks fairly realistic. We know it's not, but this it's a sort of optical, not illusion, but it's optically works very well. And this way of understanding knowledge, this way of understanding the position of humans in the world paves the way to the scientific thinking, at least in this century, which then develops, and there are phases, but however, it relies on the understanding that we can access natural phenomena, we can access the structure of the world through a systematic thinking. If now we jump a few centuries after this Renaissance picture, we see something completely different. This is a painting by a German painter called Caspar David Friedrich, and it's one of the most famous pictures and paintings from the Romantic period. What we see here is a huge sea landscape with a little bit of earth, and on this shore there is one solitary figure that stares into the vastness of sea with some dusk coming up, or dark sky. And the title says the monk at the sea, monk by the sea contemplating. So Romantic was, in a certain sense, a reaction to the Enlightenment. And the understanding of nature was one of and the relationship to nature was one of the most important aspects of this cultural movement that spread across Europe. We had It was really an international movement at the time. We have wonderful writings by Yeats in England, and we have German romantic, and also in Italy. So, and one of the most important features was the understanding of the relationship to nature. Another one was the belief that people had an identity that should be rediscovered. So it also paved the way to national movements and to the unification of countries like Italy and Germany. But however, if we focus only on the understanding of nature that was typical during the Romantic times, we see how humans again go back to a tiny portion of the pictorial space, and nature is overwhelming humans. In English we call it the sublime. In German it's called das Erhabene, and it's a word that expresses how big and majestic and threatening and unconceivable in one single moment nature is. And this kind of disposition in time, in space, can be seen also in other pictures. And this has affected, for example, what we'll see in a couple of artworks later from 20th century, because, for example, in Germany there was this overlapping of nature. And if you look at the ecosystem in Germany, it's a land cover or used to be a land cover in forests, and in the forests were the setting where the Nibelungen saga, the Nibelungen, how to say that in English? I should look up. I'm sorry, I totally forgot the word. However, the Nibelungen saga. Maybe you know Wagner. Okay, so the Nibelungen saga is the story of the heroes that are also told in Wagner's music and opera, and all these happen in forests. So there is a sort of overlapping of national identity. At the time became a national identity, and a cultural identity that paved the way to the building of nation. And I think it's interesting in German culture how the relationship to nature has evolved then, because if we see a picture like this one, which is from the early 20th century, it's by Otto Müller. Otto Müller was one of the painters from the expressionist group called Die Brücke, which means bridge towards the future. And again, this was a reaction towards modernity, and it was a reaction against academia. So one of the favorite activities of this group was to spend time in nature. And we see here how those two girls are bathing. They are naked, but they are naked in a way that is quite different from the way that Italian painting usually depict nudity, which is symbolic. Here we have two naked girls that are bathing, and they are in a natural setting, but without any symbolic meaning. And now, after this picture, I will show you some more from the 20th century art history. So I will slowly narrow down from the representation of a whole cosmos to single artworks that either contain animals or directly address the relationship to nature. And I will then focus on some artworks by bioartists or artists working in the field of art and science or with living matter that might somehow address or critically address the ideas that I've been presenting so far. But before doing that, I would like to show you this picture by Francis Bacon and this picture by Rothko, who are two artists I deeply love. But in this case, we see an animal, a dog, and a tiny portion of a shadow of a man. However, this dog is somehow evoking a human presence. So it's a dog that is loaded with a human meaning. It's not a dog in a natural setting or in a detached from his owner. In fact, we also see the leash. And why I'm showing you this or picture like this wonderful Rothko's light red over black, because in the experimentation in the experimental art of 20th century, we can see the influence of the discovery of the human subjectivity. So the understanding of the world becomes more and more individual and less related to a bigger system. Of course, this is not valid for all artists, but we can see this tendency of exploring one's own inner world. So when we see after World War II works like Yanis Kournelis, who brought the horses in the gallery, of course this creates or this opens the huge field of, are we allowed to bring living animals in the gallery? How are they treated? But what happens here, and what was in the intention of the artist, was to create a short circuit between the representation and the living. So the representation of life and life in per se. And he used horses, which are highly symbolic animals, and they have been depicted over and over in art history. For example, we know the royal portraits of kings on wonderful horses ready for the battle, whereas here what Kournelis stages is the bare reality of the animal that urinates and shits in the gallery. Another artist that dealt with living animals or living beings in their artistic work are, for example, Giuseppe Pennone. This is an artist that directly addresses anthropocentrism. Giuseppe Pennone is an Italian artist, and he creates wonderful works and sculptural works with trees that he empties and then relocates in unexpected settings. And this is an early work where he inserted steel letters into a leaf of bread, cooked it, and then left it in the open. So when birds come and pick the bread, they will leave the alphabet because it's not interesting for them. So the way he addresses the topic is through language and showing how languages can be totally unusual, totally useless to animals. And this picture goes back to the understanding and to the overlapping of national identity and nature in German culture. It's a work by Joseph Beuys, who was a visual artist and performer, and who created a body of work involving nature. So he's one of the artists who paved the way also to the contemporary discourses on the topic. What he did here, he took 7,000 stones. If you go to Berlin and you visit the Hamburger Bahnhof, you will see some of those stones, and they are fairly big and very heavy. So he covered the place in Kassel, for Documenta, which is one of the main exhibitions, art exhibitions in Europe. He covered the public space with these heavy and huge stones, and for each stone that was adopted by one or by someone, he would have planted one tree. He probably never planted 7,000 trees, oaks, but the idea behind this gesture is to take the heaviness of German experience, of the post-war German experience, and of the feeling of guilt or the responsibility for World War II and Nazi time. They were still occupying the public space at the time, and still does, but that's another story. Take it, transform it through a gesture of care, and plant a tree, so recreate the forest that originally was the setting for his culture. And so this was a powerful work that involved also the audience, the public space, and a series of gestures that overlapped sculpture and action, sculpture and performance. This is another work by him. It's called Tallo. Again, you can see this in Hamburger Bahnhof in Berlin. And does any of you can guess what it's this yellow matter we see in the picture? Sorry? Fat? Cheese, I heard. Any more ideas? It's fat. It's animal fat. The sculpture has this strange shape because he created a basin in a dead angle of a building, and then poured melted tallow in it. And the tallow took several months to cool down and became solid because the volume was so big that still inside it was movable, and then relocated it into the gallery. So he used factory or industrial waste, which at the same time is biologically a rich element, to spot and shed a light on a public space that was not used, and relocate that in a gallery as an art piece, but using a material that could be disgusting for someone. So if we go to more recent times, we see then the work of artists like George Gessert, who is one of the pioneers of bioart. George Gessert created a body of work by selecting and breeding and selecting irises and other plants. In this case, we see one iris, and then the notation that you see also in gardeners or collectors of plants. They, after each breed, they mark down what was done and how, so they have a sample collection at the end. We see first bloom, diameter. It's very scientific in the notation. And he used only natural breeding in the sense that he created the breeds by combining different flowers. But however, his intention was twofold. On one side, he wanted to work with the genetic aspect of life, and at the other side he wanted the living flower to be part of the creation, or to take part of the creation of the artwork. And of course this is the work that took a lot of long times, because the breedings were naturally done. Something very different is the work by Eduardo Katz. It's a work where that's what he says, he combined the genome, his own genome, and the genome of the flower, so that the flower expresses his genome in the red veins. And I've now seen the plant, and I don't know how many people actually have. However, this is a completely different approach of working with living matter, because we see this intentional recombination through breeding, and this is an intentional recombination through genetic engineering. So we see two different aspects of the human agency on the living. Another interesting work, I think, in this realm is by Kira Riley and Jennifer Willett, whom I know was guest of Outside Salon. When was it?
Oh, it was one of the first one, actually. 2003 or so.
2013? Aha.
Yeah. But she also came other times. She was here last time we did the Outside Salon.
Okay, so long-time friend.
Yeah.
Long-time friend. And what we see here, it's two naked human bodies re-inhabiting a scientific laboratory. So if you are familiar with this kind of hoods, you know that they must be always sterile, because in these kind of hoods, if they are inside a biological laboratory, if it's in a chemical laboratory, the hood serves to clean up fumes. But if you're working with cells, for example, or with tissues, the hood is the place that is completely sterile, because it serves to prevent contamination. So what they did was to inhabit again a space that was meant to be sterile and then abandoned, and staged a performance that was meant for pictures. So they tried to critically address the division between humans and other creatures in the lab, which is a highly encoded and highly controlled environment, and has to be like that in order to collect reliable data. But at the same time, it creates a set of hierarchies which are embodied in the biotechnological apparatus. Or another artist I sometimes work with, which is Teresa Schubert, and this is an interesting work where Teresa's practice features mostly fungi and Physarum folicephalum, which is so-called slime mold. And in this case, she cultivated fungi and tattooed geometrical shapes on the top of the fungi, so that as it grew, she could observe the transformation of the shape that was made by the organism. And so I see in this a resonance with the Bauhaus understanding of geometry that then was given, that is then given to nature, and see how nature reacts on that. And then she uses that for installation, but that's basically the concept behind it. So she gives the agency on the artwork also to the living organism. And another artist who works with the agency of the living is Tash Bates, who's an Australian artist. Has she been here?
I wish we could invite people from Australia, but...
Yeah, it's a long shot, isn't it?
A little bit long.
Yeah. But what Tash does is Tash works with Candida albicans, which is Candida that every human has and can become problematic when you have infections, and you have, for example, in case of poor hygiene, you will have Candida in your genitals or in your mouth. But she investigates the intimacy with this inhabitant of our own microbiome by exposing it in the gallery as a living artwork that evolves and then slowly, sometimes, usually dies. But of course, the idea of working with an organ that is considered dangerous, but still it inhabits regularly the human body, it refers to a feminist approach of investigating intimacy with something we usually tend to object. So we have seen a variety of possibilities of strategies of understanding human agency on the cosmos, or human agency on the ecosystem, or human agency on the biosphere, which are three different words with different meanings, and that we can sometimes use. And what we have seen is the distribution from this kind, where humans are placed in the top. Whereas if we can compare these tree of life with the most recent ones that was published in 2016, that is based on mapping the genome of the so far mapped. So it's based on the comparison of mapped genome we have so far. And so, can any of you guess where humans are? Or maybe is there any of you who is familiar with this picture more than I am? Yeah, it's somewhere here. It's not even mentioned. And all the rest, the way bigger parts, are creatures that are invisible to the eye. And we might maybe now discuss about the ideas we have presented. I think I have said enough, so thank you for listening.
Sorry. Do you want to take that?
Yes. So if I remember well, there is no mic for the audience?
No, there's no mic for the audience, so if you want to say something, not scream on top of your lungs, but be here.
The room is not so big.
Yeah, the room is not big.
I was wondering, as the techniques progress with centuries, or to add more vocabulary for the narrations and artists, how do you feel those vocabulary building blocks influence that narration? You see that start off with more religious and larger, more sublime subject matter, and grew to more shrunk to more subjective and introspective and artist-centered narratives. Do you think there was a correlation between the increasing vocabulary and the shrinking of the narration?
Well, that's a good question, because of course it also refers to the structure of the presentation I gave, because I choose a specific artistic movement in contemporary times today artwork is so articulated because of the access to the artistic production, because of the progressively become more democratic access to technology. Now we can make films with a smartphone, which was not possible 100 years ago, for example. So the possibilities are so diverse that it's somehow challenging to make the right choice when preparing a presentation. And I have decided to present you this selection of artworks because, at least in my view, they present an evolution of this understanding of the human agency of the cosmos that we have discussed at the beginning. But of course, we could start from these Madonnas and then discuss gender. So after saying that, I think that I truly think that today's access to technology has become so much easier than it was in the past. Technology is so much closer to everyday life that it spurs artistic creation to question that relationship we have to technology. I don't know if this is a good answer.
So I was just wondering that when you started the presentation, you showed that how in the art we see that the human is like comparatively smaller from the god or like whoever we consider bigger than us, and eventually we moved to a place where the humans were equal to nature and stuff. And the last artwork that you showed us, and you mentioned that the humans are not even on the frame, on the map. So does that like somehow indicates that now that big form has become instead of like God or something like more human-like, to in general we, even though we consider ourselves to be very advanced and at the top of the nature and controlling everything, the art itself shows that it's not so, and there are so much things that we may not even be aware of, and they are controlling us in some way. I mean, it's too abstract that I can't even it's properly. But
I think it does. Yeah, I think that at least this was in the intention of the artist, because as I also in my previous reply, I've narrowed down my presentation to artists that, in my view, explore these dynamics. And I have also selected some artists who intentionally take the human out of the artistic creation, which is not possible, because in the moment you choose an organism instead of another one, and you place it in a setting, or you create some conditions to grow in a certain way, or to create some patterns, like in this case, you have an agency on the artwork, but at the same time you leave the organisms to express an agency too, which can be unpredictable because it can die, and then you have a dead artwork. But at the same time, there is this gesture of giving the possibility to the other to intervene in the dialogue.
And then whether you see connections between this increasing attention to non-human agency and debates about reality-seeing agents, about what humans are doing to the planet at the moment?
I guess there is a connection in there. And I must say that personally I find the word Anthropocene very problematic. It has become a buzzword. it's a very powerful tool because it expresses a concept in a direct and clear way so that it's understandable for most of the listeners. At the same time, the term has evolved beyond the intention of the scientists who created the term itself. And it has become politically loaded. So the term was used in a paper, first in a paper describing how the increase in temperature can be linked to the use of oil in the industry. So as a consequence of industrialization, and the term was used by geologists to describe geological phenomena or geological era, and it has then expanded to and it has included climate change, which is of course related, but also the more complex scene where and interconnections of pollution and the pureness of environments. But of course, where artists working with non-human agents do tackle Anthropocene, because probably it's a phenomenon that is so big to be defined in only one word that we probably need to create more words to talk about that, and probably it's our duty as artists and scientists to create those new words, because we can't express all this complexity in one word.
A little more about this particular piece.
It's a fascinating one. It's a It's a very fascinating story. So Tash Bates, she's a biologist and artist and feminist theorist based in Perth in Australia, and she has been working with the Candida albicans for many years now. So she's quite familiar with this organism. And in this case, she created agar. Agar is the substance you use on petri dishes to grow your bacteria on. She created agar with her own blood, mixed with her own blood to create the right environment good environment for Candida to grow. And the patterns we see is a pattern of Victorian tapestry that relates to a time when hygiene was, personal hygiene was, I don't remember exactly what was her point, but there was this link between the time when body hygiene and the awareness of certain diseases was developed, and Candida, which is a intimate inhabitant of our body. Sorry? She created. I didn't ask her, but I guess she created cutout, and then she smeared the inoculum on the cutout. And once she took the cutout out, only the parts that had been smeared were inoculated. So in the beginning, you had growth only in where the smear happened. Is it clear now? Okay. So I'll try to explain it better. So if you take a sheet of paper and you cut it, and you put it on an agar plate, and you take, for example, a liquid, or you take a stab and smear this contaminated material on your sheet of paper, you will cover the whole surface, but once you take the sheet of paper away, what stays on the agar plate is only the parts that was cut out. Okay? It's a stencil. Thank you. Easy word. And, sorry? Like this.
It looks like
yeah, no, and then she created many. She created many of these frames that were then placed in a sort of living room, so you could sit next to the candidal becomes growing behind your head. But eventually, the artwork grows and covers the whole surface because it expands beyond the stencil, and eventually dies.
it is an enclosed plexiglass casing.
Yeah. So there is enough oxygen to live, but it's enclosed, so there is no risk of contamination outside.
Thanks.
Oh, thank you.
Do we have another question? Can we take another question? Or we actually have a question.
Okay.
So I noticed that when you are illustrating the beginning, you included a lot of pure artistic works. And then towards the end, as we approach contemporary time, the connection between artistic and scientific material are somehow intersecting. However, I see that in reality, in our world, what happens is before the arts and sciences, up until the 1600s, they are very much included, and now they are very much separated. So I'm wondering if you have given any thought about it, because I find it very somehow paradoxical, but also very interesting at the same time.
Yeah.
That's a great question.
It is, I know.
And of course, I don't have a
Reflective answer for that, but I'm paying myself some thoughts about it. And
actually, I have to say that we see a work like this one requires a big biotechnological apparatuses to be realized.
because you need to
Go to a genetic engineering lab. But where is it? Here. This is also highly technical. But the technology that is embedded is different. Yeah. And it goes back to the first question that today's artistic vocabulary has a huge variety of tools that can be picked. I can make up a performance, and then my next project with DNA, and the next project is a video. I have this freedom. I don't know if at the time this picture was made, artists had the same amount of possibilities. I don't know. We should maybe collect some data and then give a scientific answer on that. But at the same time, what I see, it's really a huge question. And what I see is what is in sociology is called differential specialization. I don't remember the guy who created this term, but basically once you establish in the production of knowledge, maybe you, Luigi, can say something about that, but in the realm of knowledge, some disciplines established, and then within the discipline there are smaller fields that establish, and we need to go to narrow down and narrow down and narrow down to create reliable or acknowledged knowledge in the discipline. And what happens is that disciplines don't talk with each other, also within the same realm. So, like, bioartists don't talk necessarily with photographers, which is not true, but we take two different words. I'm sure that in physics is.
The last two questions, because I see that people are starting to, I have an idea. So, is that brief or?
Yeah, apparently. So I would like to respond to your question.
Oh, my question.
Yeah. So, while accepting that art and science are going away from each other, but I personally feel this is not actually true. If you look, for example, mathematics, the pure science. I mean, one of the pure science. Many of the sub-branches of mathematics have been inspired from art. For example, fractal mathematics, topology.
But can you say this in your department? Are you a mathematician? Can you say this in your department?
No, I'm not a mathematician.
Oh, you're not a mathematician?
I don't know.
Is there any mathematician here who can say this, that mathematics is art and is inspired by the arts? Because that's the problem. The problem is not that they're not separate or they're not.
Manjul Barber was last year VOP when he came here, and it was basically he said in his lecture that he considers like mathematics to be a type of art where you can express the patterns and you can interpret the patterns and like make patterns. So like that is how I get derived from there.
Speaking of who?
Manjul Barber, the physicist of I guess 2006.
But these are exceptions. You understand this, right?
Yeah.
So I was not talking about the exception, but I was talking about the mostly the institution, the institutional level.
Oh yeah, for sure.
As soon as something becomes an institution, it becomes conservative, it needs to be, and also
Exactly.
But we're here.
I think we can only take another question, then we can move to the next stage. I think that Philology was before. So hold on to your question later. Okay.
So, I appreciated your demonstration tool now and all the consideration that you and the connections that you have done during your journey. In particular, this image I think is very interesting because it is made with a geometrical perspective, as you know. And what I think it is very interesting is that also today images that in some way try to simulate reality, for instance, photography, cinema, computer images, 3D computer images, the metaverse is still used as well, and are still dating that way. So we have to think that this technique that has almost 600 years, because it was invented in 1434, 1435, is still futurely important. It's still futurely fundamental when we try to simulate reality. Still tools available. And it is simply a convention. It is a future. It's not something.
Yeah, okay, so I think we can move on. So we're going to take a minute break because we have to a little bit stand up. So you're invited to come. Of course, it's inspired by this lecture. So we have to switch the forms and you do the diversity of language. And during the next part will be interactive. and we will interact with objects that have a value. So I invite people to care for this object. So when you manage that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.